so I don't forget. Keep the recording thing going, and then I'll do the live on Facebook. Dun, dun, dun. All right, share not on my timeline. How about in a group that is Hope Speakers? And we will see. It should notify us that it goes live here in a second. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the live teaching for Hope Speakers for this week. And I've got a new friend, somebody I've just met, emailed once, and then now meeting, Tamra Andress. So
I love the digital connection.
I see on your
world.
website, Tamra like camera. I like
exactly. Just real quick, but with a T, right?
Right.
This is honestly, Keith, I learned this in college when the loud music was playing and no one could understand what you were saying. Right. I would be like, Tamra, like a camera, but with a T, and no one forgot it. So it's just stuck.
No doubt. That's great. That's great. So I want to, as we were talking about, there is so much that we could talk about because you're an author and you're a podcaster and you're a speaker and you do YouTube stuff and you have a live event and you have a nonprofit and there's.
I'm gonna go take a nap.
I feel like with the 7 stages of the progress path, I feel like I need to have 7 focused interviews with you because you are covering the bases. But we're gonna dive into specifically helping our members know how to prepare for getting on stage, what you do when you get off stage, and I'd love to hone in on that. But first, just give us an overview of Tamra Andress and what your ministry is, kind of how your journey has gone up to this point.
So I clearly didn't start all of those things out the womb or all at once. It's an evolution. And I believe that all of us have the gift of being able to take what is the message on our heart or our testimony and pull it into a business ecosystem. I have a lot of background in entrepreneurship, in business. Over the course of my 20s, opened about 7 different companies, 2 of which actually worked and took root.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good percentage, actually.
Not bad, right? But I was 29 years old and had 2 little ones under the age of 2. I had 2 global companies and a husband who was also an entrepreneur. And my priorities were way out of alignment. So much so that I was either going to lose my family or I was going to lose my businesses. And I chose to lose my businesses instead of my family, and went on a 3-year hiatus of trying to just dissect who am I. I was a speaker always. I've literally had a microphone in my hand since I was little. But I really wanted to curate an opportunity for people to be transformed rather than to just be listening to me for listening's sake, which is really where I was before then. I was like, hey, I have a mic, listen. But now it's like, hey, I have a mic, let's co-create together and let's be transformed. And so after 3 years of getting my ordination and minister's licensing and doing like a year-long worship school, the Lord took everything that I had developed through entrepreneurship, and now I got to build an entire new mission connecting entrepreneurs to their purpose with Fit in Faith. So Fit in Faith, it's like fitness, but not, it's the mind, body, spirit element. That's how I started my podcast. It's how I started my membership program, my coaching courses. All the things that I do now are really premised off of understanding alignment. So faith-driven entrepreneurs is kind of my sweet spot in the place in which I hang out.
That's awesome. That is so good, man. I love it. I think after we're done hitting record, I think you and I are going to talk until like 6 p.m. So this is we
we
could just
totally
go.
could. I totally love it.
So when was that 3-year hiatus? Like how long has it now been since you picked up the mantle again?
Yep, it's been 5 years since that time. Okay. So our company will be hitting 6 years in the spring of next year.
Okay. Wow. You have been a busy woman.
Yes. And it's funny because that word kind of makes me cringe, to be honest. The word I like to use is intentional. I feel like when we hold tight to being busy, which is really glamorized these days, and you know, that's the first thing people say, how you been? And they're smiling and they're like, I'm busy. I'm like, wait, your smile and that word just don't go together. And no doubt. I also feel like I get uninvited if I'm busy, but I feel like there's always an invitation when I'm intentional, because people know that my yes has validation and my yes means something. And so if I'm written off because I'm busy, my friends won't call me to do the fun things. But if I'm intentional with my time, they know I'm going to make time for it if it's important.
Right.
So I encourage people who are listening, it's the same with your yes or your no when you're speaking, right? Like, you don't have to say yes to every speaking engagement. You don't have to say yes to every summit that comes into your email inbox. That's something I had to learn. I had done about 40 virtual summits speaking in the spring of 2021. And we know a lot of that had to do with COVID. But it was an interesting thing where I was just saying yes, yes, yes. And it was awesome. But I realized that my yes was actually inhibiting my yes to my community directly. And so I had to shift the intention of those stages.
Yeah, I love that distinction. I always have a word for the year, and my word for the year a couple years back was intentional, and just okay, let's just make everything intentional, not because that. And and I don't know this. I don't want to get off too big of a tangent, but I think that is important to start, since so many people that are in Hope Speakers are fairly new to the journey or new to turning it into a business. That starting out intentional is much, much better than trying to get intentional after 10 years.
Yes, that's so true.
So starting with that intentionality is so true, because I find that because people like us, we're on social media and they'll see us at different events, they just assume that we're too busy to do anything. And I think that the having the intentionality, certainly, the friends of mine that know that I'm intentional with my time still invited me to play pickleball yesterday.
Yes, good, right? Good. I've heard it, the quote, and I don't even know who says it. I need to figure it out, but I love it so much. Is like, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
For sure.
Right? Because we're gonna make the intentional time because we're used to scheduling and time management and all of these other pieces. I think what's really an element of connectivity to the speakers who are here listening with the intentional piece is, if you go in with the heart set and the energy of saying and knowing that my speaking career is a business, and with my publishing house, we say this all the time, that your book is your business. A lot of times people just want to write for the sake of writing. And I love that. I love to write and doodle and journal and all of those things. But when I do it with intention that this message is going to linger, there's going to be legacy to this message, just like your stage moment. It could be a small stage. It could be a huge thousands and thousands of people stage. Your legacy is being left in those words. And so the intentionality behind it is so critical.
So critical. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to shift and get kind of uber practical. Like, I want you to put on your coaching hat, and you've got a couple people, you've got Ella and you've got Bethany here in the group, and we'll let them unmute and ask some questions here toward the end. But put on your coaching hat and think about when you are invited to speak somewhere. So when it's not one of your own conferences, your own live events where you're doing all of the design and all the background stuff, but you're invited to come speak at a conference. You're maybe, let's say you're doing a breakout as well as a keynote, and which I know that frequently happens with me. If you're doing a keynote, they want you to stay on for another day and do another couple. It's like, we're paying to fly you out here. Let's do
they're like, we're going to suck everything you have. Absolutely.
Right. Which I actually love, because then you get to interact with people. But that's
for sure.
So let's say you're being asked to go to a conference. You're going to be doing a keynote and you're going to be doing a breakout. I'd love to know what do you do to prepare for that, both from a messaging standpoint as well as intentionality around getting ready to travel, around what kind of communication do you have? Help us set up systems before they get broken in what you do.
Yeah, I think the first thing is communicating with the person who's asked us to come, right? And I asked two specific questions. Why did you ask me particularly to come? And not necessarily the secondary question, make sure that doesn't come first. Because I think that question asked them a specific supporting element of, oh, I asked because of your energy. I asked because of what you leave on the stage. I asked because I love the connectivity you have with the audience. They're going to answer in a way that's unlike what the next question is, which is, what would you like me to speak on? Because we know as speakers, while we might have one particular message, they might have an entirely other intention for you being in the room. And if you just assume that the always, presented message is the message that they too want, you're missing an opportunity to expand your breadth of speaking ability, as well as creating intentionality to serve the host. Because that's the first thing we want to be focused on, is how can we serve the host? Additionally, as you mentioned, are there any other ways?
I need to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, let's go.
All of you Hope speakers, you've heard me say a million times, speaking is serving. Speaking.
Yes.
And so here you have somebody who I did not pay ahead of time to say that, who has just said it. Okay, so go ahead.
No, it's so good. But it goes directly connected to that, is how else can I support you during the event? Because if I can do anything else, even if it's for the speakers, right? There are so many in-between moments that happen at an event. You could do a specific mastermind cohort for people. You could speak into the lives of the speakers. For me, and for I think a majority of us, we could do I'd love to just pray over all the speakers before it happens. What is another opportunity that you can serve that you're leaving an impression outside of the stage? Because we know those interactions are the ones that really leave the lasting impressions. So those would be before I ever even think about what it is that I'm speaking to. Then when I know the answer to those questions, I really go into prayer and petition around the people that are in the room. So I've considered the hosts, I've considered their intention, but I also know that God has picked people out to be in that space. I am not likely going to get to interact with the majority of them prior to me being there. And I may or may not know them through that host community. And so I want to know what he wants them to know, not what I need to necessarily say, because then it goes back to Tamra's talking and not I'm being guided by the Spirit in this scenario. So when I do that and I pray and petition, I start writing down what I hear. And what I hear, again, might be really different than my traditional messaging. I might be hearing something based on the current scenario, predicament, prayer life that I have going on in my personal life, which I always find is the most connected way to be with an audience, is to talk about what you're walking through right now, not necessarily all of your testimony from years and years ago. One of the questions that you asked was just when did this happen, and what did you do recently? I think that allows people to see the humanness that we're all in the becoming journey, and that just because I'm on stage doesn't mean that I figured anything out much more than anybody else in the room. So once I get to that place, I am not someone who, and I haven't always been this way, but I don't write the entirety of my speech out. Okay. So it's not a TEDx speech. TEDx, you have to memorize word for word. That's a totally different speaking engagement. I just do highlight ideas and then I put bullet points underneath them. And that's how I kind of formulate what it is that I'm going to share. But when I first started my career, I'll be honest, I wrote everything out. I wrote it as if I was saying it on stage, and I would get so in my head that when it would get time for me to share, you're in this place of memorization. And I highly encourage you not to do that, because you will have stage fright and you will forget what it is that you meant to say, rather than being in the Spirit, allowing it to flow and having an outline type format. Because if you don't say the thing, it's not going to matter. And it's also not going to pull you out of context to what you intend to do. I'll pause there.
Yeah. And I mean, this has been great. This is a masterclass in starting strong. I agree. The one piece, because I'm not a memorizer, and how you organize your notes, it'd be so fascinating to see your notes, because I think they're probably going to look a lot like mine. I do a lot of that. I also find that that I need fewer of those bullets the longer I've been doing it. It's like anything, you just get more proficient at it and everything. And so I love it that you've talked about the evolution of even the way you do your notes and what you memorize. What I do advise when I'm coaching somebody on a speech is, and I don't know how you feel about this, my coaching is, if you're going to be on stage for 30 minutes, memorize at least the first 2. If you're going to be on stage for an hour, memorize the first 5. And I don't mean memorize in terms of this word's coming after this word's coming after this word, but just memorize in the sense that you know exactly what your opening minute or 2 is going to be, so that you don't have to even glance at your notes at all for the first, because there's so much connection that happens in those first 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes. And the number of times that I see really good speakers glance down at their notes, and you're like, it's a crutch. You don't need it, but you're missing an opportunity to connect. So I love that. And I love that you've got a couple questions. I was so interested to hear what your questions were, because I have 2 questions I always ask as well. And in similar vein, one is very similar, one is not. One is, what do you want me to accomplish with the time?
That's good.
Which leads to them saying, this is why I want you here, and this is what I want you to talk about, because there are so many different things we could talk about, right? But what do you want me to accomplish with the time? Because if I ask, and that's even specific with the wording. So Bethany, Ella, anyone else that is watching this, I don't ask, what do you want me to talk about? Because that leads to a topic-driven answer. And what you want me to accomplish leads to a purpose-driven answer.
That's good.
And that changes, because if somebody says, oh, I want you to talk about Bible study. Well, do you want me to teach a passage of scripture? Do you want me to encourage somebody? Do you want me to challenge them? Is this primarily an audience that doesn't know Christ at all? There's so many different things that talking about Bible study could open up. So that's the other one. And the other is the uber practical of, how much time do I have? And then I plan for 5 minutes less. And because something happens and you want to get invited back to an event, don't go over by 10 minutes.
It's true. I'll be honest, I'm so guilty of that. But what I notice is, one of my superpowers is my ability to evoke emotion out of the audience. And I prepare for it. Like you talked about, how do I connect with the people in the audience? I prepare for that connectivity. I don't prepare because I'm not the Holy Spirit. I don't prepare for what that's going to look like. But I also am so intentional about timing that I am looking at the host, and they're kind of giving me the go ahead of, I see where this is going. I sense what the Holy Spirit is doing. Just keep on keeping on. However, not every conference is like that, especially when I'm doing something that's not a Christian-based space. They're like, stay to the time, end early. That would be even better. So there's kind of variability in that. And also understanding the connection that you have with the host, if there's grace in that or not. But I will tell you, as a conference and event host myself, it is to the minute, and I am asking them to be precise with reason. But that's why some of the people who bring me on, I'm the closer with intention that there's going to be this experience, this altar call, this emotional turmoil that they're going to be wrestling with, or this high at the end. So it's just a matter of what your superpowers are, and knowing that, and also preparing the host for it as well. So if you know that every time you get on stage, people are going to cry, you should probably let them know that, because it's going to be important with where they put you on the schedule. I wanted to bring back one more thing that I was thinking about. I sort of alluded to it on how else can I serve you? If you have something that you are really great at or really love to do, and they're not asking you to do it as a part of their event, likely it's not because they don't honor that. It's likely they don't know that that's something that you do.
100%.
So I'm a really good speaker. I'm a great keynote speaker. But one of the things that I love to do, because I have this desire to break speaker culture, which is don't stay in the green room, don't just come in and fly in and leave and then nobody gets to talk to you, or don't just avoid the person who is after you by getting photos in the back while the other person isn't being honored on stage because you're kind of in the limelight at that point. Like all of that is a huge no-go for me. Is the element of the fact that I love to curate a spoken word that I'm curating while listening to all of the speakers. And so I'll come on at the end as almost like a gift to everyone to do these high level poetic connection points of all the mic drops through the weekend. So super awesome. Unique. I don't know anybody else that does it. You have to be really engaged. And so that part is kind of exhausting through the weekend, but it's something I'm passionate about. And so I have to present that. I have to present myself outside of what they're asking me to do. And when that happens, I get that much more connectivity with the community and the host.
Yeah. Oh, that is awesome. I love that. And the intentionality even around that of what can I bring to the table that they don't even know that I can bring to the table that's going to be a blessing to them. And kind of, I've done the same thing because most of the time I'm asked to come and teach on the content in this book, how to enjoy reading your Bible, how to study the Bible and read it and actually like it. And that's what I'm asked to talk on. But a lot of people don't know that I do word for word storytelling that is straight scripture.
Cool.
It's on the page. And so I'm like, hey, if you would like, in between some of the worship songs, I could just walk out. So it's almost it's a spoken word thing. It's just me in normal clothes, but it's word for word scripture. And so so sometimes I get to do that depending on what's going on and what the worship band is and what the setup of the stage and all that kind of stuff. I don't get to do it every time for sure.
It's so fun.
But I love that. And even I want to put a bow on this kind of what we do beforehand and that thing. What you can bring to the table and what else you can do, how else you can serve them is important, including things that have nothing to do with your speaking. So quick example, I spoke at a fundraising banquet for a pregnancy resource center outside of Denver last Wednesday.
Okay.
I flew in and I was early. We had lunch and then we went into the room, and I could tell that the 3 or 4 people that were there that were getting ready to do some of the decorating were overwhelmed because the round tables, the 20 round tables hadn't been set up yet.
Yep.
So guess what we did for the next hour? We set up tables and chairs. And it's like, there's kind of this picture. I know that event planners have gotten screwed on that so many times and have the kind of the diva mentality of the keynote speaker, because even the men's retreat that I fly out tomorrow to go speak at a men's retreat in Wisconsin this weekend. And they sent me a specific email saying, we really like it if our speakers will interact with the men when they're not on stage.
Yeah.
Which they don't send that email if everybody has been generous with their time.
So true.
And I'm like, I'm not going to sit in my room. I got to play some ultimate Frisbee or something.
Yes. It's so true. Well, and I literally, when I'm hosting an event, I bring together all of the speakers. And if the speakers are not available to be there the entire weekend, I actually don't bring them in. It's very rare that I'll allow that to happen because I see it everywhere, and it creates this separateness that I don't think the Lord would want us to have. And how can you really pour in if you're not also pouring in afterwards, after your moment of shining? Like, that's just not the way it works. It'd be like coming and only enjoying dessert at a meal, like with your friends. Like, that's not cool. Like, come for the appetizer, the full, like all the things. I love that you said that, Keith. And interestingly, for those of you who might not be the keynote at all the conferences you're going to yet, you might just be in the audience right now. There's a couple of things to take note of that Keith mentioned. Last year, I had a venue. He was kind of like, honestly, like the custodian of the venue that we were in. Now, that wasn't his job title. He was the executive pastor at the church. However, he was cleaning, he was setting tables, he was unlocking the doors in the morning, he was closing the doors. He was like the one-man show. And I had no idea that he was like a 4-time best-selling author, that he speaks around the country. I didn't know him from Adam because he wasn't the main pastor. And he was just an armor bearer all weekend. And as I got to know him, he was like literally praying over people. He was really just a wildly supportive asset to the conference. And when I got to talk to him afterwards, just saying thank you and wrote him a letter of gratitude, he's like, I would love for you to like read some of my books. And I'm like, wait, what? You have books? Tell me more. So he's actually one of the keynotes at my conference this year.
That's
and
awesome.
Had he never shown up in that capacity, I would have never taken notice to him. And so when you are going as a guest, go as a servant and see what could happen moving forward. Same thing. I had an armor bearer who stepped in unexpectedly, and this is what they told me. And you could do this. You could pitch this to speakers. If you have any sort of connection, say, hey, I don't know if you're bringing an assistant with you or not to this particular conference, but I would love to come and just be your content grabber. I will stand in the shadows the entire time with your phone, and I will just grab content for you backstage, side stage, wherever you are. So you don't have to worry about that. Somebody did that for me at one of my first big conferences, and it was such a blessing. Not to mention they brought me hot tea when I needed it, or would guard the bathroom when I needed to go in for like a change really quick. And that person then became a keynote speaker at my next conference. And so you're not looking at it. I'm sure that they weren't thinking about it like that. I wasn't, but it just goes to show you like, hey, if I bring this person in, I know they're going to serve beyond the stage. And that's what we're supposed to do as speakers.
Serve beyond the stage. That is the title. I'm going to write that down. That is the title of a title of a master class. So it depends on whether you or I can create the content for that master class fast enough. Who actually gets to own it?
We'll collaborate. We'll make it together.
Yeah, we'll collaborate. Serve beyond the stage. That is so awesome.
Yeah. And those are just 2 examples. Gosh, I could think of thousands of more.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. Makes such a difference.
It speaks to so many things we've already touched on. It speaks to a servant heart. It speaks to intentionality. And it also speaks to something that, again, Bethany and Ella have heard me talk about before, that speaking is a long tail game.
Yeah.
It's not something that the next event is not the only event. How you think about showing up there, what you can learn from the other speakers, from how they do things. I mean, I love when I've now been doing, I'm old enough now where I've now been doing this longer than most of the other keynote speakers at conferences, because I'm approaching year 30 of speaking on stages. So I'm oftentimes the most seasoned person, but for me to be able to sit down with the speakers and learn what tools do they use, what resources, because they've grown up in a culture that's so different from me. I mean, if you and I sat down, I would be like picking your brain, because you know the tech, I look at your website and how you do this and there's so much we can learn from other people who are, even if they're not the same content, even if they're just content adjacent, we can learn so much from each other. And going in,
true.
I say,
well, and I think like
if we go in from what we can learn instead of what we can say, it'll be a better conversation.
Yeah. And that's one of my favorite things to do when I am engaging. I love to sit front row because there's always holes in the front row. It perplexes me. I'm like, what are these people doing? Get to the front, right? I love to sit in the front of the bus. I was the front of the classroom. I was definitely the teacher's pet. I will brown nose you all day long. And so I'll sit front row and I'm taking notes. One, because they literally are brilliant and there's mic drops in everything. Also to encourage them, like, man, I want to see, because you can't really see when the light is in you can't really see like 4th, 5th, 6th row. But if I see someone taking notes and being like, man, that's good, and shaking their head and smiling and giving me all the energy that I would also give from stage to the audience, man, that's such a treasure. And it really cements that friendship as well in a different way. And so get video of that person that's speaking. If you're also a fellow speaker, send them an image later. You did awesome. Tag them on social media and be front row. Be like, I can't believe I had missed this person before. Or I thought I couldn't even get up to go to the bathroom, right? Like be authentically servant like led, and it's going to change your speaking game moving forward.
For sure. Absolutely. So now before we shift to after the event.
Yes.
we haven't talked a lot about when you're doing a breakout. So when you have a room and it's instead of, 500 to 5,000, it's 15 to 150. What have you learned about how to do that well? So let's say there are breakouts every hour. You've got 50 minutes. And there are 82 people in the room. What tips do you have for people that find themselves in that? Because honestly, when you're just starting out, there are conferences that I did breakouts at for 5 years before I ever got on the main stage.
And that's awesome. Like, I actually prefer breakouts in a lot of ways. Like, the adrenaline's awesome on main stage, and you love the media that comes to follow with all the content that you have. But breakouts are where intimacy happens. And we know intimacy is honestly what cements anything else moving forward, especially a client relationship. If that's something that you're looking to gather when you're at these events, which if speaking is your business, then it should be. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. And so breakouts specifically, I am a person who I love to surprise and delight people. I don't think we have enough surprises in life. And so a part of that could be that they're getting a gift when they come into my breakout. And it doesn't have to be something outrageous. It doesn't have to be something expensive. It could be something that you've never offered to anybody else from a deliverable standpoint, so that you're getting their email, right? There's an exchange of value there. But I love tangible gifts. I love tangible presents. So I generally will have something in their seat or something at their table setting that is just cementing my brand, also connecting to them. So my brand, as you can see, is very like colorful and vibrant. And so I want to cement that in as, Tamra, her picture and her wardrobe, even though I'm wearing black today, which is rare, her wardrobe is I did, is colorful. It's also a part of who she is always. And so it allows people to recognize that variability. Another thing that I love to do is I love to call people out and do on-the-spot coaching. One, because I am comfortable with it. So make sure it's something you're comfortable with. But also if they're coming in and I'm asking them their names as people are getting seated, I'm asking them their names. I'm asking them what they're here to learn. What's been their biggest takeaway in the conference so far? What are they hoping for from this session? When you're communicating with them, then you are able to now come to the front of the room, make direct eye contact and be like, man, I just got to meet Amy and I love that she is here with this intention. By the time I'm finished speaking, I want to secure that that has been learned. And so Amy, would you do me a favor and like at the end be willing to share what your takeaway was? And she's like, yeah. Right? Like a lot of times they have never been asked to stand and speak up or to just be in front of a room. So if they're there with that intention, like get people out of their comfort zones, that will be a transformational moment. They will never forget you. They will never forget that moment. And you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for them. But there's elements of keep these in your pocket, because if you can do this, it's going to change the trajectory of your speaking career, because there's going to be a testimonial connected to that says the pivotal part of this conference, I was going to say concert, it could be a concert, I've done that too. This conference wasn't actually the main stage, it was my breakout session with Tamra. And that host is like, oh wow, what did Tamra do that was different than everybody else? So gifts, getting their names, knowing why they're there, calling them out in the middle of your share, and having them stand to speak are a couple of things I would say as variables to other ideas that I could bring up.
Yeah, I completely agree. That calling out of somebody's name, and sometimes from timing, you don't have 10 minutes beforehand. The other speaker is going and you're just walking up. But early on in one of my examples, I will frequently take somebody that's in the fourth or fifth row and say, hey, what's your name? Oh, John. Yes. So let's say that John and I were meeting in a coffee shop to talk about this, and then just bringing that in. And then if later on, 30 minutes later, I reference John by name,
so good.
Everyone in the room feels like I've been just talking to them, because they've seen that I've connected with a human, not just an idea. And that's hugely important. And oftentimes, and I want to call this out, a lot of people, when they're just starting out and they picture the keynote session. Now, don't get me wrong, keynotes are my favorite thing in the world. You talk about my happy place. I'm like, put me on a stage in front of 1,000 to 3,000 people. Tell me to make them laugh and like the Bible more. I'm like, that's my happy place.
That's so good.
That said, oftentimes when we're just starting out, that's the only thing we picture, and we devalue the impact of a breakout. And even now, 28 years into this game, last month I spoke at a conference where I did the morning devotion. So I technically did 3 keynotes and 1 breakout.
Wow.
And I got a message from someone after that said, your breakout was the reason God had me at this conference.
Wow.
So the impact, that was for 60 people.
Yeah.
The 3 keynotes were for 1,600.
Right.
But that was the reason that God had that one person there. So do not ever discount the power of the breakout. It's
and I think that there's an opportunity too in that space, regardless if your keynote is before or after. When it's after, I get super excited about that, because then I can plant seeds on what is going to happen on main stage, so they're that much more engaged when I'm on main stage. Say, I'm not going to share that secret with you yet because it's in my keynote and I can't wait for you guys to be there, right? Or if it's afterwards, be like, remember when I said this on stage? Let me go a little bit deeper here, since we're now in this intimate setting and I have a little bit more time to expand. Right. And then they're like, oh, wow. Not only are you showing your professionalism, that you're not just like, you haven't created these separate things that exist inside of different boxes. You're pulling it all together for them, which then creates a storyline of who you are. And so it's really interesting that all of these tactics, they really go back to serve you long term, but it's also cementing ideas. It's like the power of repetition that you probably have heard about 1,000 times. You want to repeat the thing 3 to 5 times so that they can seal it. Yeah. If they're doing that in different scenarios with you, especially if they're on different days, and now they're sealing this next day with you, I mean, the trajectory for it is just really beautiful.
For sure. For sure. Okay, before I kind of put us all in gallery mode and let Ella and Bethany ask some questions, just quickly, when an event is over, so again, not an event that you've run, an event that you've just spoken at, what do you do? Do you do anything to evaluate that? Do you do anything to follow up? What is the first hour off the stage, the first day, the first week? What does that look like for you?
Well, I am my worst critic, and we probably all are. And so when I get off stage, I have almost an immediate review process. I am gathering, what are my own emotions in this moment? What was I reading from the audience during that? And what was a variable to this experience than every other experience that I had? And that's happening within that day time frame. So sometimes you have a line of people waiting to talk to you, and that's not an option. But there are other times where you kind of get like, especially when I'm in a closer, everybody's kind of like leaving at that point. Then I am really in my head. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. But I really feel like it helps me learn for the next time. For instance, I generally have this one way that people respond when I'm on stage. It's very emotional. And this last time that I did this particular stage, was my 4th time on that stage, people were like arms crossed and leaned back. And I was trying to process, like, are they tired? Are they mad? Are they not liking this heavy conviction that I'm bringing their way? Which was the answer, as I found out later. But usually I get such immediate feedback that I'm processing as good and great, and there was outcome. This particular one, it took a week. But by the end of that week, I was getting, this is where the transformation was coming into play. I knew what I said hurt, and I knew people were going to have to hold space for themselves for it to be unpacked. And I knew on the other side of that, if they were willing to do the work, there was going to be transformation. So to have reviews come in 5 days later to say, I didn't like what you had to say, and I am so glad you said it. That to me was like the biggest honor, that the Lord allowed me to share these heavy things with them. Other things is I'm generally pulling at least a QR code, depending on like a level of the community. I am pulling an opportunity for them to engage with me while I'm on stage. So whether I'm in a breakout or I'm on a main stage, if I have a slide deck or if I have a link in bio that they have in a virtual workbook or whatever that be, they're engaging with me. So I am hopeful that I have now built my list while I'm there. And in the midst of that, they're getting an immediate 24-hour email flow. They're getting a follow-up from there. If I recognize an email individually, I'll send them an individual email. I also am super excitable to connect with people on social media. So if I get a picture with them, I'm like, make sure you tag me. I'll share it out to my community. Make sure you send me a DM. That's where I'm most active. That's where I'm spending and engaging to build that community and solidifying those relationships.
Yeah, that's great. Do you follow up with the host?
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. There's so much more. We could go down all these.
Oh yeah.
Host stuff is so critical. Again, you want to hear like, hey, what you want to get feedback, like constructive criticism. Was the goal met? Did I serve the audience in the way that you were hoping to? You don't want me to answer it from a host perspective, but there are ways that I do that internally so that my speakers will get feedback that's not just from me, because of course I'm going to be on like the post-conference high or exhaustion point, but I want them to get more immediate feedback from the audience. But connecting with them, sending a thank you, even if I'm not a speaker at those, sending the host an email afterwards as an audience member. You're going to be set apart. I promise you, nobody else is doing it. Send a direct email. Say thank you. Tell them what your biggest takeaway was. Tell them that you can't wait for the next year. How can I serve you in the future? Ask those questions. What's the next thing you have going on that I can help you with? Thanks a lot for everything. I usually will send a photo along with it, so it's like more lighthearted, of a selfie we've took together. So being mindful of that too.
That's awesome. Love it. Love it. All right. Well, I am going to invite Bethany and Ella. I'm going to remove spotlights of these. There we go. So Bethany, Ella, if you've got any questions or comments or thoughts, or feel free to unmute. Go ahead, Ella. I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love that you were talking about serving both the audience and the other speakers or the host of the event. And I certainly would have thought about mingling with the other people, because I wouldn't be to the point where I, would feel that I was set apart. I'd feel like an attendee that just got asked to, participate in the, the teaching or whatever. But that's interesting to me to think about the conferences that I have loved. Mm-hmm. And it would be the ones where the speakers were available.
Yep.
I mean, certainly people go to see somebody who's truly famous and don't expect, Mick Jagger to be wandering through the
I want to be wandering through no matter how famous I get. That's something that's so important. I literally tell my team that. I said, don't you ever let me be like that. They know. I'm like, you will hold me to my feet. And they actually have to pull me out from engaging because I'm just with the people. That's what Jesus wants us to be like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's so funny if you think about like, what is the point of speaking? It's to get across a message that would serve or empower or improve others. And why wouldn't you want to have those same conversations one-on-one? So yeah. That's just interesting.
I was at a conference, Ella, it makes me think about one of the speakers did this really beautifully. He said after his keynote, he would be in the hallway at a table offering on-the-spot coaching. Now, timing wise, I didn't like it. I was the host. So like I noticed that people were actually getting up and leaving before the next speaker was coming on stage. So don't do that. Right. But say like, I'm going to stay an extra hour afterwards. If you want to meet me in the lobby, I'll be there. I'll be in the parking lot. Like just don't like inhibit anything that's happening from the actual conference, but have people engage in a conversation. You will have takers and it will end up converting into something deeper later, regardless of that is, even if it's a friendship.
I think probably I've spoken at a few things, but that's not my main focus. But I think as we go forward, homeschool conferences will be a place where I engage. And what a great way to continue that, to say to the breakout, if you come by my table, I'll offer you, individual coaching as opposed to I'll answer your questions. That feels more personal and more intimate. That's a really great idea. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure. Another thing that I do is I actually will have events inside of events. And what that looks like is I do pedal and preach once a week, which is a part of my podcast. The Holy Spirit prompted me. I don't know why. It sounds crazy, but it is, and I do it. Anyway, so if I have an opportunity to get inside of a cycle bar locally, I will show up and say, hey, tomorrow morning, any of the crazies that are up at 5:30 a.m., if you want to come hang out with me, I'm going to be pedaling. I'd love to ride with you. And then I have all of this other memory that's being instilled, and people are seeing me like sweat and not in my sparkly glitz and glam that I am when I'm on stage, right? Like I become relatable, and I want to be relatable. I don't want people to put me on any pedestal. Been there, done that. I don't want the t-shirt. So I think understanding that you don't have to be a peddler at 5 a.m., but you could be like, hey, I'm going to be at a coffee shop tomorrow morning because my plane doesn't leave till noon. I'd love anybody to come hang out and let's like decompress after the conference and talk about our biggest takeaways. You are still going to be the liaison of said conversation, even if 5 people show up or if 15 people show up, they're going to look to you to direct the conversation. And therefore you're going to get to share your zone of genius again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome.
I first of all, I love this conversation because I've fallen into like, I guess, mind traps or whatever it is, because I stinking love get to speaking events, whatever it is, early and connecting with people, because I hear better anyway, one-on-one, and I don't get that audio visual cues anymore when I'm on stage. So it's completely like, okay, God, like that's just because I can't see or hear it anymore. Gone to that level. So I rely on that previous conversation and then get still with God, like, okay, you know, based on these conversations I have, what do these people need? And I need you to speak to me, to give them, you know what I'm saying? But I've also, like, I've heard from so many other speakers, they're like, well, no, you don't need to get there early. You need to be in your, you know, with God, you need to be silent with God, and blah, blah, blah. And not that I don't agree with that, but I'm like, well, you know, so I kind of like second guess myself. And I've noticed the last couple conversations I've had with people, not in this group, not in this group, okay, but other people have just been like, you know, you need to say what you want and then kind of go off to the table and like sign books or do that. But I love, you have no idea how much this meant to me to hear the relational, because that is who I am in a nutshell. Like that is me. And so it meant so much to hear that from you today. And then what I'm hearing is that we're speaking from heart. We're speaking from who we are. We don't have to become somebody else. You know what I'm saying? Just because we're on stage does not mean that we all of a sudden change into this other person. We are who we are, both on stage and off the stage. And you exemplified that by all the examples that you put out. You're keeping it simple. You're not reinventing yourself. Yeah. So I loved it.
I love that, Bethany. Thank you so much. And I think as I'm hearing you share, one of the things that I am such an advocate for, and even Keith mentioned it when it came to his humor, is like play. Like this is just another place to play. Right. And so, you're going to be center stage, and I have danced on stage. I have like done the Dougie on stage. I've said jokes. I've, you know, I had like a,
I have not danced on stage.
Come on, Keith.
I've gotten thank yous for not dancing on stage.
I just love looking at it as if it was this place. Like this is in my home. This is my office. And like, I would do a little jig and have fun. And so when I think about what's that entry song look like, or what's something I could do to loosen up the audience, I am very much a full immersion, full body learner as much as I am a full body speaker. And so something that you love to do, bring it on a stage. It could be something silly. I was at a conference and they have this like collective audience response, kind of like a church would be like, amen to the pastor when they're preaching. Instead of saying any words, they would have your hand go up and you would do this, like a 2-tap, doop, doop. And so if something was good, they go, and you would see 600 women, not all of them at once, so it's 300. Everyone, if something good, like a mic drop happened, people were like, and so the person on stage was like, oh yeah, I'm jiving with the audience right now. And also the person next to him, like, yeah, that was really good. And so if you could think about something that engages, hey guys, every time you hear this word, you know, you're cementing messages and relationships with people in that moment. No matter what happens moving forward, they're going to remember you for this one thing. I'll never forget that.
That's funny. That's funny. And
awesome.
And that, you know, you said you're glad that you're hearing that you don't need to become somebody else. I would go further to say you can't.
Yeah.
You can't become somebody else. I have years ago, a good friend of mine said, and he was a great speaker, loved his stuff. And he said, you need to do you because if you don't do you, you doesn't get done, and God's creation is incomplete.
It's good.
And that was kind of one of his centerpieces to his talk, is because he speaks on creativity and all that. And you need to do you, because if you don't, then you doesn't get done.
Yeah.
And when we try to become somebody else, we don't do them, and you doesn't get done. So
good.
Definitely.
Good.
Well, you get all up in your head in that regard anyway. You stutter, you'll see people stop and stutter, and those are some of the things that I know that they're doing in that moment. And so it's also an encouraging thing to have a community like this, where you get to like practice and process, like, why does that keep happening to me? Well, it's likely because you're trying to do something that you're not actually attuned to. It doesn't mean you shouldn't practice and lean into some of those hard parts, but I think that the more loose and free that you are, and you're speaking to the thing that you really, really know without a shadow of a doubt. I don't need notes to talk to you about mind, body, soul, health, or alignment, right? I can just talk about it. I didn't prepare for this particular thing. Keith literally prepared me 2 minutes before, right? I just get to speak out of a place of wisdom rather than a headspace that would get me in trouble. So don't do that.
I love that.
Right.
I love that.
Well, another, we're coming close here to that. Did Bethany or Ella, did either of you have a pressing question that you wanted to ask or anything? Okay, good. So last question that I just love to ask people is, what is one of your travel tips? It can be something that you bring, something that you do, a way that you prepare, something you do on the plane, something you do in a hotel. What is a travel tip?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you one that is probably not something people have shared with you, but I have been discovered as, and you are, I'm telling you right now, you're newly discovered as a speaker athlete. Okay. Your voice is so important. It's so important. And just like I have personal trainers, or I have a nutritionist, or we have a doctor, we need to have vocal coaches. And so I literally will speak some days 7 hours in a row. And if I am not taking care of my voice besides just hot tea, then I am not doing myself justice. And I've had some scares where my vocal cords have like gone away. So you think of singers in this regard, and if they, get laryngitis, or they have to cancel entire tours because they can't speak, you will be on the verge of that if you're standing in the fullness of your gifting. And so I have it. Do I have it near me? Oh, it's in my room. It's in my office, but it is like it's a voice machine, and it's basically a mister for your throat. And so it's just water. It's purified water inside, and it's so different than, you think drinking water is good for you, but you're actually not touching your vocal cords when you do that. So it's not doing anything. It's just soothing your throat. We want to get to your vocal cords. And so you can get it off Amazon. It's like $14. Highly recommend it for the people who speak a lot, because I want to protect my vocal cords just like I want to protect my mind and health and all the other things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, everyone. Well, this has been a fantastic 56 minutes. I've really, really appreciated this time. So Tamra, thank you.
Likewise.
I will stop this live stream. And then,
bye, y'all. Nice to meet you.
All right, Bethany and Ella, we'll see you next time.
So fun.
Yeah.